Today, we say our final goodbye to Ryan, my beloved son who passed away. My heart aches even more because my husband, Mike, didn't even show up to his funeral. Frustrated and heartbroken, I decided to call him. His voice on the other end of the line was cheerful, a sharp contrast to my grief. "I'm in Hawaii for my parents' 70th anniversary," he said, oblivious to the pain in my voice. When I told my mother, she was initially stunned, but her shock quickly turned into anger. "What, they're in Hawaii?" she exclaimed, her face reddening. Without hesitation, she resolved to confront Mike and his parents. "I'm Emily, a 40-year-old office worker. Mike and I have been married for 10 years and share one child, our son, Ryan. For the past 2 years, Ryan has been fighting leukemia, a battle that has kept him hospitalized. Despite missing most of his early school days, his classmates would visit him, their presence bringing him joy. Ryan's resilience inspired us all, and his determination gave me strength. My parents were always there for Ryan, visiting him daily. My mom would often say how she looked forward to the day when Ryan could enjoy his favorite foods again. My dad, though diagnosed with dementia a few years ago, also made frequent visits. One day, mistaking me for a nurse, he said, "Thank you for taking care of my grandson." His words were bittersweet, though his memory of me faltered. His concern for Ryan remained unwavering. Ryan, wise beyond his years, understood his grandpa's condition and would kindly play along whenever my dad said something odd. Their bond was heartwarming, a sharp contrast to Ryan's relationship with his father. "Can't you visit Ryan sometimes? Don't you care about what he's going through?" I once asked Mike, desperate for his support. His response crushed me. "Ryan doesn't like me, so it's better if I stay away. Besides, I'm really busy." It was true that Ryan and Mike didn't get along. Mike had never been involved in Ryan's care, not even when he was a baby. Ryan, understandably, grew distant from his father. Whenever Mike had free time, he chose to spend it with his own parents, who also showed little interest in their grandson's health. "How can he be so heartless?" my mom said, her frustration evident. "And his parents, do they not care about Ryan at all?" I replied, half jokingly, "Maybe I married the wrong person." I had fallen for Mike's kindness when we were dating, but he had become cold and indifferent to both me and Ryan. "If I'd known he was like this, I would never have introduced him to you," my mom said, regret coloring her voice. Mike and I had met through my uncle, who was friends with Mike's father. At the time, I wasn't seeing anyone, so I agreed to meet Mike. He seemed kind, and we hit it off. Before I knew it, we were dating seriously and eventually got married. But things changed after the wedding. Mike's parents, who had been warm and welcoming before, became controlling. My mother-in-law, who once greeted me with smiles, turned harsh. "You're part of this family now, Emily, and you'll do as I say. If not, we'll ensure you get a proper divorce," she once told me coldly. As I sit here now, grieving for Ryan, I can't help but wonder if I made a mistake trusting Mike and his family. I initially thought my father-in-law was a quiet man, but over time, his true colors began to show. He often made insulting remarks, saying things like, "We only let you marry Mike because the head of our family introduced you. Otherwise, there's no way we would have let someone like you marry our son." At first, I didn't understand his disdain. My uncle, who runs a real estate company, had introduced me to Mike. Apparently, during the introduction, my uncle mentioned that I came from a wealthy family. This led my father-in-law to assume that my father owned substantial properties. That assumption fueled his condescending attitude. I hadn't heard any of this from my father or uncle, so I initially believed my father-in-law's comments. After Mike and I got married, we moved into the house where my maternal grandparents had lived. They had passed away, and the house had been empty for some time. My parents planned to rent it out to prevent it from deteriorating, but when Mike found out about the house, he pleaded with my parents. "I promise we'll take good care of it, so please let us live there," he said. "It's close to her family, too, so we can help look after them." The arrangement made sense. The house was near both our families, which would allow us to keep an eye on our parents. However, having Mike's parents so close quickly became a burden. Mike would often invite his parents over and start bragging, saying things like, "Our house is so new, you must be jealous. It's so much bigger, maybe even twice the size of yours." While his father seemed irritated by the bragging, his mother would smile and say, "We could live here together. It might be old, but it's better than our place." After one such visit, I asked Mike directly, "Are you planning to have your parents move in with us? This isn't even your house." He laughed it off, claiming it was just a joke, but his mother's behavior suggested otherwise. Not long after, his parents began visiting frequently, inspecting the house as if they were preparing to move in. Living here would be better than our poor house, my father-in-law muttered one day. At least there's no rent in this dump. I was fuming when he called the house a dump, but my mother-in-law's actions were even worse. She ignored me completely while picking out a room for herself. When Mike didn't speak up, I decided to set the record straight. We're borrowing this house from my parents. My grandparents used to live here, so of course, it's a bit old, I explained. My in-laws looked surprised, but my father-in-law quickly retorted, that's why it's in such poor condition. His tone was dismissive, and I thought the house was far better than where they lived. My mother-in-law, however, accused me of lying. I trust my son more than you, she said. Her disbelief didn't change the facts, so I let the matter drop. Still, I was uneasy, worried they might push their way into moving in. That fear subsided when I discovered I was pregnant. The talk of them moving in abruptly stopped. Perhaps they realized that living with us would mean helping care for the baby. One day, I overheard my mother-in-law say, Emily's parents should take care of the baby since they live nearby. I'm not doing it. I hadn't even asked for her help, but her comment stung. It was hard to fathom how she could be so indifferent about her first grandchild. When I told my mom about it, she just laughed. Leave the babysitting to me, she said. You don't need to ask someone who doesn't want to care for a sweet grandchild. She was right, and I decided to rely on my parents once the baby was born. When my son was born, my parents were overjoyed, but my in-laws only visited once. Even Mike's reaction was underwhelming. He didn't seem moved by the birth of our son, which was deeply disappointing. Don't worry, my mom said, trying to reassure me. Once the baby grows a little, Mike will feel more like a father. But as time went on, Mike showed no interest in our child. When our son turned 5, he fell ill. After several tests, the doctors diagnosed him with pediatric cancer. I was devastated, expecting Mike to support me through this unimaginable ordeal. Instead, he coldly said, "You'll have to cover the medical expenses yourself." It's not my problem. His words broke me, leaving me to shoulder the weight of our son's illness and medical care alone. I was furious at my husband's attitude as a father. His lack of empathy was infuriating, but his mother's words cut even deeper. It's because Emily passed on her genes that Ryan has cancer. None of our relatives have anything like that, so it must be her fault, she sneered. Hearing this, my father immediately stood up for me. Don't you care about Ryan? We'll take care of him ourselves. You can do whatever you want, he said, his voice firm and protective. My father's support forced my husband and in-laws to leave quietly. Even though I was already overwhelmed by my son's illness, their cruel remarks made everything harder. My mother, however, encouraged me. Don't be discouraged. Ryan needs you to stay strong. We'll do everything we can to support you, she assured me. Bolstered by her words, I resolved to focus entirely on my son and not rely on my husband any longer. With my parents' help, I juggled work and Ryan's care. They were retired and dedicated themselves to supporting me, something for which I was endlessly grateful. Despite his diagnosis, Ryan's condition initially improved, and he managed to live almost like any other child. However, my husband doubted the seriousness of Ryan's illness. Is Ryan really sick, or are you just trying to fool me? He questioned one day, watching Ryan play happily. I ignored his baseless accusations. Arguing with him felt pointless. Over time, my husband spent less and less time at home, retreating to his parents' house. Oddly, his absence made things easier for me, as he brought nothing but complaints. My parents stepped in to fill the gap, taking turns helping me care for Ryan. Meanwhile, my husband seemed increasingly uninterested in our son's life. He only returned to the house more frequently after Ryan was hospitalized 2 years ago. Leave the housework to me, he'd say casually. Then, with a smirk, he'd add, by the way, why don't you just give me this house? I ignored his remarks, but it was clear his concern was less about Ryan and more about the property. His plans to move in with his parents loomed over me like a dark cloud. During this time, my father was diagnosed with dementia, and my mother and I were constantly busy managing his care. My husband and in-laws remained oblivious to my father's condition. Even when my father occasionally visited, they seemed unaware. One day, my husband said offhandedly, "Your parents were here earlier. They were just wandering around. Are they not going to help with Ryan?" His relaxed tone infuriated me, but I let it go, too exhausted to explain. As my father's dementia progressed, my uncle began visiting more often. He and my mother frequently held serious discussions. When I asked about it, my mother only gave vague responses. I was worried, but before I could dwell on it, Ryan's condition worsened. Despite preparing myself for this moment, the reality was overwhelming. With my husband unreliable and my father's health declining, I leaned heavily on my mother for support. When I updated my husband about Ryan's deteriorating condition, his response shocked me. "I'm busy right now. Stop calling me. You handle Ryan's situation," he said, dismissively. His lack of parental responsibility pushed me to the brink. I began seriously considering separating from him. Not long after, Ryan passed away. The grief was unbearable. I couldn't bring myself to handle any of the arrangements, but my mother and uncle stepped in, ensuring I could remain by Ryan's side until the very end. Just before the funeral, my uncle began to panic. "Where are Mike and his parents? They can't skip the funeral, can they?" he said, his voice rising in frustration. Seeing his concern, I called my husband. "Where are you?" "It's time to say goodbye to Ryan," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm at a party celebrating my parents' anniversary." "I told you not to call me right now," he replied cheerfully. Hearing his voice, my mother's face turned red with anger. "He's in Hawaii," she exclaimed. My uncle, visibly furious, sprang into action. While I hadn't expected much from my husband, knowing he chose a vacation over our son's funeral filled me with rage. "You knew Ryan was in critical condition and still went on a trip?" I said, my voice shaking. "I pity Ryan for having a father like you." I hung up, tears streaming down my face, as my mother comforted me. "I will never forgive them." "Don't worry, everything will be gone by the time they return from Hawaii," she said cryptically. Though her words confused me, I didn't have the energy to question them. Thanks to my mother and uncle's support, the funeral went smoothly. Afterward, however, I felt lost. My entire life had revolved around Ryan, and now I didn't know how to move forward. "Leave the future to me, Emily. Go back to your parents' house and take it easy," my uncle advised. Taking his advice, I returned home and helped care for my father while taking time off from work. My workplace was understanding and granted me an extended break, which was a relief. Then, one day, my husband called. "Emily, I can't get into the house." "Did you change the locks?" "Changing them without notice is awful," he said, sounding panicked. "I didn't change the locks," I replied calmly. "But I'm planning to end things with you, so don't call me anymore." I hung up, but moments later, he called again, this time more frantic. "My parents' house has been demolished. There's a land for sale sign up." "What's going on?" he shouted. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, cutting him off. "Check with my uncle." When I checked with my uncle, he seemed pleased and invited me to visit my in-laws' family home to see what was happening. Curious and apprehensive, I went as instructed. When I arrived, I found my husband and his parents standing outside, looking utterly stunned. "What's the meaning of this?" my father-in-law demanded. "Our house is gone. Is this because we didn't take you to Hawaii? Did you demolish the house out of spite?" The accusation left me baffled. I could never do something like that. "I was busy grieving my son and arranging his funeral," I retorted, frustrated by the absurdity of her claim. Just then, my uncle and mother arrived. My mother's expression was cold and resolute. "People who didn't even attend their own grandson's funeral have no right to complain," she said, her voice sharp. "You should reflect on your actions." Mike and his parents fell silent, but the silence didn't last. My father-in-law quickly recovered and began ranting. "You can't just demolish the house and sell the land. I'm the owner of that property," he shouted, brandishing a document. His declaration made me pause. Could he be suffering from dementia as well? He proudly showed us a contract bearing my father's signature, claiming that my father had transferred the property to him, but the document looked suspicious, hastily done, and amateurish. To make matters worse, it stated that the property had been given away for free, an impossibility. This contract isn't valid, I said, my voice steady, and for the record, my father suffers from dementia and cannot make sound decisions. Mike and his parents insisted the contract was legitimate, claiming they were unaware of my father's condition. My father is not the owner of this land, my mother interjected firmly. The property is registered under my name. You must have coerced him into signing this. Her words shocked me, but they clearly unnerved Mike and his family even more. My uncle stepped forward, producing detailed land records and a lease agreement. This land and building both belong to Emily's mother. You were renting the property from us, he said, his tone stern. You stopped paying rent months ago, ignored our attempts to meet, and left us no choice but to terminate the lease and put the property up for sale. Mike's parents stared at the documents in stunned silence. Were we behind on rent? My father-in-law asked, turning to my mother-in-law. I thought it was fine since we're related to Emily's uncle, he muttered. Caught off guard, my mother-in-law confessed. We were planning to trick your father into giving us the land, so we didn't think paying the rent was necessary. Her admission left me furious. They had schemed to exploit my father's condition from the very beginning. As I tried to process this revelation, Mike pulled out another contract, looking regretful. Is the house we live in also your property? Does this contract mean nothing too? He asked, his voice tinged with desperation. The document in his hand, much like the first, bore my father's signature. It was clear Mike had created a fake contract, thinking our home belonged to my father as well. How ridiculous, my mother said, shaking her head. You tried to deceive us, without even confirming who owned the land. It's absurd. Mike and his parents stood there, trembling with anger and humiliation. Just then, a young woman appeared from behind a nearby building. When will you pay me back for the travel expenses I covered? And what about the life insurance payout from your son? She asked. Her appearance left Mike visibly panicked. My uncle smirked. Even after your son's death, you took your mistress to Hawaii. You truly are shameless, he said. We've investigated everything. I was stunned but quickly realized that the woman was Mike's mistress. My uncle must have suspected Mike's infidelity and secretly looked into it. Realizing she'd walked into the middle of a volatile situation, the mistress hurriedly fled. I didn't think you could stoop so low, I said to Mike. Our son must be appalled from heaven. Unfazed, Mike chased after her, leaving his parents to face the fallout. How does it feel to have enjoyed yourselves in Hawaii, relying on my son's life insurance money? I asked coldly. Unfortunately for you, I'm the beneficiary. You'll have to pay for your extravagant trip on your own. With no comeback, Mike's parents quickly left. After the funeral, I realized what my mother had meant about removing Mike and his family from our lives. I filed for divorce and sought alimony. It turned out Mike had been cheating on me for 2 years and had planned to abandon me after our son's death, thinking he could avoid responsibilities like child support while benefiting from the life insurance payout. Mike had even exploited my father's dementia, coercing him into signing a fraudulent contract while my mother and I were preoccupied with Ryan's illness. However, he hadn't realized the property belonged to my mother, not my father. In the end, Mike and his parents accrued massive debts. Mike had to pay alimony and cover the cost of their Hawaii trip. His mistress left him, and he was left alone, drowning in financial ruin. Back at my family home, I began to recover from the pain of losing my son. My mother and I continued to care for my father, and I found solace in believing that Ryan was watching over us. One day, my father said something unexpected. Ryan is visiting. He's running around happily, he murmured. Though startled, I chose to believe that my son's spirit was near, encouraging us to live with strength and positivity. For his sake, I vowed to keep moving forward.